Good morning, Ms. Norman. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Mr. Chairperson. Thank you.
Yes, are you ready?
Yes, we're ready. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, before the witness is sworn in, I just want to place on record that before you, you will have 3 documents. There will be 2 that are in a presentation file, and that will be exhibits CC1A and B, and exhibit CC1C. And the one in the lever arch file will be exhibit CC1D, and that will also be written submissions by M. Apleni Re Sundaram.
That's fine. The file containing Mr. Rajesh Sundaram's affidavit and supplementary affidavit, or statements and supplementary statement, will be marked Exhibit CC1, A and B, and the one marked Additional Information, Re Sundaram, will be marked Exhibit CC1C, and the lever arch file will be marked Exhibit CC1D.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The lever arch file is written submission by M. Apleni Re R. Sundaram.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, this morning, Ms. Vichale and myself will be leading the evidence of Mr. Rajesh Sundaram. I may place on record that 3 notices were sent to all the persons that are implicated by Mr. Sundaram in both his main and the supplementary affidavits.
Yes.
There's only one out of the ordinary manner of service on one of the implicated persons, and that is on Mr. Muhsin Williams. He was served via WhatsApp because the commission had difficulty. They established communication with him, but later on couldn't. But then the only alternative was to serve the notice via WhatsApp, and he has not responded. May I also place on record that out of the 13 implicated persons, only 1 person has reacted to the notice, and that is Mr. Apleni. And his submissions, Mr. Chairman, are the ones that are contained in that lever arch file, which is Exhibit CC1D.
Yes, okay.
Yes. Maybe just for clarity's sake, I may just place on record that Mr. Apleni does not wish to cross-examine Mr. Sundaram at this stage. However, he does say in the very last paragraph of his statement, of his submission, that in the event that Mr. Sundaram implicates him, then at that stage he will reconsider his position and he may apply for leave to cross-examine him.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, the evidence of Mr. Sundaram will be relevant to paragraphs 1.6 and 1.9 of the terms of reference. He is the journalist that was employed as a consulting editor by the Africa News Network AN7, which is known as AN7, for a very short period of time, and he comes from India. We now wish to lead his evidence. May he then be sworn in. Thank you.
Yes, I think there is counsel who may wish to place himself on record.
May I please, Mr. Chairman, I appear on a...
Please come forward so that it can be on record. Thank you.
May I please, Mr. Chairman, I'm Van die Kerk and I appear on a watching brief for the Honourable Minister Pandor.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please administer the oath or affirmation to the witness.
Please state your full names for the record.
Rajesh Sundaram.
Do you have any objections to taking the prescribed oath?
No.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes.
Do you solemnly swear that all the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we start, I just want to thank you, Mr. Sundaram, for having traveled all the way from India to South Africa to assist this commission, to share with it matters that fall within your personal knowledge that are relevant to some of the terms of reference of the commission. We appreciate that you have come to give evidence after, as I understand the position, you have been unwell for some time, and it may well be that you have not fully recovered, but we appreciate. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just on a lighter note, may I just indicate that Mr. Sundaram has brought his twin brother with him, and had I known that they were twin brothers, I would not have been difficult when he indicated before he left that he wanted to bring his brother. And he's sitting on my far left. He's an attorney also in India.
Oh, okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Well, they seem to look alike.
They do.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let's proceed.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Sundaram, you prepared 2 affidavits, am I correct?
That's correct.
And if you have 3 bundles in front of you, if you could just take the one that is written Exhibit CC1A and B. Do you have it?
Yes.
Thank you. If you turn over, you'll see there's an index, and then I would like you to just turn to page 4 of that affidavit. Are you there?
Yes.
Thank you. Do you see there is a signature there? Is that your signature?
Yes, it is.
And the date, did you have that commissioned on the 5th of April 2019?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. And then that you deposed to that before a notary public, as you see on your left-hand side of that page?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And where was that?
This was done in Delhi,
Yes.
in India.
Thank you. And then could you please then turn to your supplementary affidavit, which is marked under CC1B. And I would like you to turn to page 33 of that page, of that document.
Yes.
Are you there? Is that your signature that appears on there?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. And did you also depose this before a notary public in India?
Yes.
And the date was on the 29th of April 2019.
Yes, that's
Is that correct?
Yes.
And is everything that you've said, both in the main and your supplementary statements, affidavits, is everything that you stated under there true and correct?
Absolutely. It is
Yes.
true and correct.
Yes. Thank you. Could you just tell the chairperson briefly about your career as a journalist? Your CV does appear, Mr. Chairman, his CV appears as the very last document in that same bundle at pages 34 up to 36. You may just want to turn to that and then just briefly tell the chairperson
Okay.
where you studied and you qualified as a journalist and where you worked.
Okay. So I did most of my schooling in Delhi, in India, at the Father Agnell School, and I have a degree in journalism from the University of Delhi. This I got in 1994. So since the time I graduated from college, I've been working straight through as a journalist. I've also worked as a consultant, a media consultant, and somewhere down the line, since I had been a television journalist and also helped set up stations, I'm a bit of a journalist and a startup person now. I started my career, like I said, in 1994, immediately after my graduation, with the Business World magazine, which is one of the leading business magazines in India, part of the Anand Bazaar Patrika group. From there, I joined the Z Telefilms, which has got a station called Z News, which is one of the oldest television stations there, back in 1996. I was there for about 7 years, starting off as a reporter and working my way up through the ranks. I have headed the bureaus in Chennai in South India and Bombay. I was a bureau chief for Z News for a few years. After Z Telefilms, I joined New Delhi Television, which is a very well-respected television network in India. I was there for about 4 years, after which I joined an international television network, which is the Al Jazeera television. I was there for 2 years. I was the India correspondent based out of New Delhi. And I traveled through the region to Sri Lanka, to other parts of South Asia to report for Al Jazeera. Immediately after that, I joined a startup which was NewsX. I was part of the leadership team there that took the station to launch. And this is where I had my experience in helping launch channels from an editorial standpoint. After NewsX, I joined the India Today group, which is one of the largest, oldest television networks in India. I was there for 4 years as editor, post which I went back and joined a station which is called News Nation, which was just starting up at that time. So I was the first executive editor there, helping the station launch, part of the leadership team that launched that station. Immediately after which I was contacted by Mr. Lakshmi Goyal, who was part of SL Media, the joint venture partner of ANN7 with the Gupta family, and asked whether I would be interested to go to South Africa to set up ANN7, which I did, and why they found me a suitable candidate for this was because I had exposure to international media, having worked with Al Jazeera for 2 years. Also, I had experience in being part of the leadership teams that set up stations in India and launched stations successfully. Post my experiences at ANN7, I came back to India. I was a consultant with the Rajasthan Patrika group here. And I went on from there to launch 2 stations in the south of India. One was called, is called News 7 Tamil, which is a Tamil language news station, a 24-hour news station which is still in operations and is doing very well. Post which I launched Kaveri News very recently, which again is a station which is based out of Chennai in Tamil Nadu province in India. I came back to Delhi late last year because I had been on dialysis for 2 years, and these long hours of working, and I had to go for dialysis every second day, was taking a toll on my health, and we had already decided to go for a kidney transplant, which I got done in January this year. So I quit my job last year, and I have been asked by my doctors to take rest and not get into any full-time employment for 6 months. It's been 5 months now since my transplant, and that's a brief sketch of my career so far.
Yes, thank you.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you. You mentioned briefly that you were recruited by Mr. Lakshmi Goyal when the AN7 was going to be launched. Now, could you we're going to deal with that period now. Mm-hmm. You were recruited, and at the time you were in India and you were still employed, am I right?
That's correct.
Yes. And then did you then enter into an agreement with them, a signed agreement with them?
Yes.
Sorry, before you respond, Ms. Norman, in regard to names that you think the transcribers might not easily know how to spell, just help them by mentioning the spelling.
Oh, the spelling.
Yeah,
thank you,
yeah,
Mr. Chairman.
yeah.
Mr. Lakshmi Goyal is spelled Laxmi, and then Goyal is Goel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, did you sign an agreement with Mr. Lakshmi Goyal, or who did you sign an agreement with?
Well, I was given a document which was the Infinity Media document which I signed.
Yes.
And that was a contract to work to help set up ANN7
yes.
as editor.
Is that the document that appears in the same bundle that you're looking at page 6, and that's marked
Yes.
B1?
Yes. This is a copy that I received. I had signed a copy and given on to the HR team there.
Yes, thank you. If you go to page 6 of that document.
That's a document we find in Exhibit CC1A.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we're still dealing with Exhibit CC1A, yes. And then
what page of
page 6.
Page 6.
And it's Exhibit B1 right up to B12.
Thank you.
Have you found it, Mr. Sundaram?
Just getting there.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Number 6, P1.
Yes, thank you. That contract, you have a name of employer there. Who was the name of the employer?
Infinity Media.
Okay. And then, and your name as the employee.
Yes.
Thank you. And then if you turn over the page, you under B12, that was the employer that signed the agreement.
Yes.
Yes, and you say that you did sign it, but we do not have, Commission doesn't have the one that you signed.
Well, I was given 2 copies. I signed 1 copy and handed it back. And this is the copy that I retained with me.
Yes, but you confirm that everything that's here is actually the agreement that you signed?
Yes.
With Infinity Media?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Then, so you are in India, then you signed this agreement, and this agreement was signed in May, am I right? Not, if I may just take you to that paragraph. It was not signed when you came into South Africa. You were still in India at the time.
Yes.
During that period, after you signed the agreement, where did you start working?
Well,
well, maybe let's...
Maybe just take the date first.
I'm sorry, before you proceed, before we talk about where he starts working, maybe you just want to spend a few seconds highlighting the important features of the agreement, of the employment contract.
Yes.
What he was to do, for how long.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. If you go to page B2, page 7 of the agreement. You have there the fixed term of the contract. At page 7. Are you there?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. What was the fixed term of the contract?
The fixed term of the contract was 2 years.
Yes. And the dates there? It was to commence when?
1/5/2013 and will terminate on 30/4/2015.
Yes. And then if you look at paragraph 3 or clause 3 of that agreement, there's a heading there. What does it say?
Foreign employees employed by the company.
Yes. So this would have applied to you, am I right?
Yes.
Yes. And then what is it that they were going to pay for? In 3.1.1. Same page. B2, page 7, right at the end.
Right at the end, yeah. All right, so 3.1.1, air ticket one way for the employee and all members of her direct family by eligible class as determined and approved in writing by the company.
Okay, did you bring any of your family members?
No, I did not.
And then if you turn over the page, you've got appointment and job description. What was the nature of the job that you were hired to do?
Well, I was given the designation of editor, and it was my responsibility to help set up the station, to make the editorial workflows, to make sure that the technology that was brought in to give consultancy on that, because I had worked with various other stations. So while I'm not an engineer or a technician, from a journalist perspective, I would know which works more efficiently or is more suited for the kind of systems that we were setting up here. So I was to give my advice on those issues.
We're vacillating between 2 very important broadcasts which both have a huge public interest, but we're now going to go to the South Gauteng High Court, where the judge has just sat on his seat to deliver.
Employees were hired when they were trained, and that all of them happened in a sequential order so that no time was wasted and the resources were put into optimum use so that, we got to launch the station in a reasonably good period of time. And well, that was the mandate that I had. Also that all the staff were trained properly, the technical staff as well as the editorial, the processes and systems were put in place, the workflows were in place. Yes.
And then in paragraph 4.2, you had agreed, what did you agree to do in terms of this contract?
That it could be transferred to other company groups. Condition of the contract: upon transfer, the contract shall stand transferred to the new company.
Yes. And were you ever transferred from Infinity Media to any other company?
No.
And then it deals with the place of work. Where were you going to work?
I was told that I would work out of the office in Midrand. That was the headquarters for 8 and 7.
Yes. And then it deals with your hours of work, your public holidays, and your remuneration.
Yes.
And then the remuneration, as you can see in paragraph 9.1, we debated this yesterday. It's not in South African rands. Am I right?
No, it is in South African
Is it
rands.
in-
Yes.
And then the lakh that's there in brackets.
Yeah, basically, lakh is 100,000. So they've expressed the salary that I'd get in rands in
Yes.
lakhs.
But,
So
but it's exactly the same amount.
it's exactly the same amount. Yes.
Thank you. And then it deals with all the other matters that relate to your terms of employment, your sick leave, your annual leave, and the termination of the contract, and how much notice you're supposed to give if you were to leave.
Yes.
Yes. Then you started then, what did you do exactly? Because now you're still in India, that is in May of 2013. What did you do, and at which offices did you work during that period?
Well, I worked in the office of Mr. Lakshmi Goyal, who's a joint venture partner. He had an office that was his real estate business. And we got an office, we got a little space there. So Arun Agarwal and I would work out of that office. We'd interview the people, the core team that we were supposed to take with us for this launch. So which included the head of input, the head of output, the head of production. So we spent the first month there interviewing the people for the positions, also chalking out, making a lot of Excel sheets on the planning and the requirements there in terms of how many people would be required for each of the departments, what would be the key responsibilities of each of those individuals. Also, an organizational structure was put in place during that time. So the blueprint for the launch of the station was created at that time, apart from the recruitment and the interviewing that was done for the core team that would go.
Yes. And
Before you proceed, Mr. Norman, this employment was concluded in what month in 2013?
Well, I did
last
not.
page
I did
has
not.
got 5 April as a stamp, but I don't know if that's the.
No, I did not work for the full 2 years. I was here for about 4 months.
Yes.
And I went back on the 2nd of September 2013. So I
Yes.
was here between the 3rd of June 2013 to the 2nd of September 2013.
Okay, so the contract was concluded when? When was it signed?
The contract was signed on this date, which is
The copy that
the
I have
first,
doesn't show.
it is the first 1/5/2013 is when it was signed.
1 May 2013.
That's correct, yes.
And the starting date was going to be when? Immediately?
Immediately, yes.
Okay.
But I started off in New Delhi, working out of
Yes,
Mr.
that's what I
Lakshmi's office.
also wanted. So before you came to South Africa, you already started performing your duties in New Delhi.
That's correct, yes.
And you have just indicated exactly what you were doing.
Yes.
Interviewing potential candidates, employees.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so the contract was concluded in May, 1 May 2013. It was for 2 years. You were going to come to South Africa, but before you came to South Africa, you started performing your duties in New Delhi.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Then you then had to come to South Africa after the 1 month of preparation and setting up or planning, your planning. So could you just tell us how did you go about the process of applying for a visa and how you got into South Africa?
Okay. See, applying for the visa when I was, when I decided to take up this position, I had done a bit of research on the internet, and what I read there was for work permits to be issued in South Africa, there had to be an advertisement that needed to be placed in a paper here, and if they did not find a suitable position, a person in South Africa for that position, and then these things would be, a work permit would be issued. And I thought that it would take a long time for the work permit to be issued to me, and I asked Mr. Lakshmi Goyal about it. But he told me that, they had what he called a setting with the high office in South Africa, and that the visa would be done in no time. He asked me to get a yellow fever vaccine, a note from a local police station giving me a security clearance, and a medical certificate from a government doctor saying that I do not have tuberculosis, if I remember correctly, and I handed those documents on to him. I was also told that the procedure for the visas for the people going from here would bypass the normal procedure, and that the details of these people were to be sent to Mr. Ashu Chawla in South Africa, who was part of the companies that the Gupta family ran here. I found out later that he was the CEO for Sahara Computers. And he would then speak with high officials here. I was told at the President's office, who would then direct the relevant departments to expedite the visas and also bypass some of the requirements that may be needed. So I found, to my surprise, that my visa was cleared fairly quickly, within a matter of a day. You know, they had gone in there, submitted the documents. I didn't have to go personally. I was not interviewed at all at any point, nor do I remember any of my other colleagues being interviewed by any official at the South African High Commission in New Delhi. We had handed over our documents, the passport plus the other documents, to Mr. Lakshmi Goyal's office, to his secretary, and she had then arranged for it to be taken to the South African High Commission. Calls were made to Mr. Ashu Chawla, and the work was done. I do remember very distinctly that during that time, Uday Kumar, who was a person who had recently been hired as part of the HR team, in his enthusiasm had gone to the South African High Commission with the passports without informing Mr. Ashu Chawla. And of course, he was denied access. He asked to speak with somebody at the visa section there. And I think the point person, we were told, was Mr. Shakil. He asked to speak with Mr. Shakil, and he was told that there's no Shakil who worked there. So, but of course, the next day, Mr. Lakshmi Goyal gave him a dressing down, told him that if there's visas to be processed, the process to be followed was for Mr. Ashu Chawla to be informed, for him to then use his influence in the government to give instructions to the High Commission in New Delhi for them to issue those visas. And very true to that, the visas that I had applied for and my colleagues who came in from Delhi applied for came in very quickly on application. All the things I'd read on the internet about the time it would take and the procedure was bypassed for these visas.
Yes. So are you saying that you never have to apply for either a work permit or an intra-company visa? This was all done for you at the offices of Mr. Lakshmi Goyal?
I had to fill out the visa form. I had to get a vaccination for the yellow fever. I had to get a certificate from a government doctor who happened to be a neighbor, so I got it signed from him. And also there was a police verification, so which is basically a certificate which is issued by a police officer of a particular rank, which is quite easy to get. So I got all the documents together and handed it with the visa form to Lakshmi Goyal's office, and that's it. And within a very short time, the passport came back with the visa. I was not interviewed. I did not have to go to the High Commission. I did not have to face an interview or any of that.
Yes. Now, the visa that you're talking about, which you received, is that the one that appears at page, same bundle, exhibit CC1A at page 27? In fact, that's a copy of your passport. It will be E3 at page 28.
Yes, this is the visa, and those are the stamps of the exit and entry as well.
Yes. Now, let's...
I'm sorry. That's CC1C28, you say?
Page 28, that's correct.
Hang on 1 second.
And then could you just read into the record, what does E3, what's written on E3? What type of visa is that?
It's an intra-company transfer permit.
I'm sorry, Ms. Norman. Exhibit CC1C, page 28 for me, on mine.
1A, Mr. It's CC, it's exhibit CC1A, the first bundle that you're talking about. CC1A at page 28.
Okay. Yes, you
Yes,
may
thank
proceed.
you. Yes, could you just read into the record what's written on there? Thank you, Mr. Sundaram.
This is an intra-company transfer permit, which was issued to me.
Yes, and the name, it has your name and your passport number.
Yes.
And then there are certain conditions there. In fact, it's got the dates. Could you just read what were those dates, issued where and when?
Oh, I can't read out of this, but I'll read it out of my passport, I think.
All right.
Okay. I've got a copy which has got,
You have a better copy? It's better there, okay.
Issued in New Delhi on 22/5/2013,
Yes.
if I read correctly.
Yes. And then there's conditions. Before conditions, there's something enter on or before. What was the date there? I've got 20 May.
Yes,
2015.
20 May 2015.
Yes. And then there's conditions. Could you read those conditions?
Yeah, my eyesight's a little weak, but I'll
Okay.
try.
What I have here, tell me if it is
The
correct.
first word seems to be secondment.
That's correct.
Yes.
It says
Well, as I see it seems to be secondment
to
to
Infinity Media,
Infinity Media
editor for 24
as
months.
editor for, is it 24 months?
24 months, yes.
And are you able to complete?
Yeah, now extend may not change conditions to ensure local skills transfer within period.
I wonder, Ms. Norman, in case,
Yes.
unless you are able to read this
Yes.
easily, whether if you
Could make a
have
copy from that.
a look at his at the actual
Passport.
passport and you read it from
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
into the record, I
Yes.
think that
Thank
will
you.
help.
Thank you.
Your eyesight might be better, even though both of you are wearing
Wearing
glasses.
Yes, thank you. Oh, sorry. Oopsie. Yeah, that's wrong. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And then once we have read, he can just confirm whether what you read accords with his understanding of what is written in his passport.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It reads intra-company transfer permit. It's got Ms. Sundaram R. and it's got...
I think start where it says...
So where is the secondment?
Temporary residence permit, isn't it?
Yes, it's got
and
temporary...
issued and so on.
That's correct. It's temporary residence permit issued at New Delhi on 22 May 2013. Number of entries, multiple. And it's got conditions.
All right, we're going to go back to the South Gauteng High Court where our colleague
Secondment, conditions, secondment to Infinity Media as editor for 24 months. Non-extend may not change conditions to ensure local skills transfer within period. Director General, Home Affairs, and then... Yes.
I think you must also read what is above what you have written. You have read. I think we should have started at the top.
Yes.
Yeah, do you want to read that as well?
Yes, I will start. It's control number A04701-810. And then on the right-hand corner, you've got DHA 1635, Republic of South Africa. And then you have intra-company transfer permit, and the name Sundaram R, and passport number K9491213. And then it goes to the part that we've already read out.
Yes.
Does that accord with
Yes.
what you received? Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
And then maybe you can also read up there, is it not written valid until, and then conditions work at the top? Or,
Well, yes, it would be a number that is enter on or before. Is that the one, Mr. Chairman? No.
It
No,
seems
what you
two
see.
pages.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, but what you're seeing are the stamps. You're going to take him through those.
Oh,
You're
okay.
reading from the stamps
That's
of
fine.
entry and exit.
That's
Yes,
fine.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Is it correct then that for the intra-company, was it your understanding that you would have to work for a particular company, the same company that has a branch or a head office in Johannesburg? Is that how you understood it?
That is how I understood it, but I was told by Mr. Lakshmi Goyal that this is perfectly legal and they wouldn't issue it otherwise, that it was issued by the High Commission. They've gone through the process and if it were any other case, it would not be. So I was assured at that time that this is a permit which is the right document for me to travel and work in South Africa.
Yes. Then on top of that, then you will see that there's date stamps. When did you actually leave India or New Delhi to come to South Africa?
I left on the 3rd of June 2013, which is 6 years from today. It's exactly 6 years.
Yes.
From today.
And if you look at your passport, you will find that stamp.
Mm-hmm.
It's just above what you have read on your visa.
Yes.
Yes. And then below, next to it, you also see that there's another entry stamp. Is that correct? Just next to the one that's the round stamp, and then there's one that's square.
Yes.
And then it's written OR Tambo.
Yes.
International Airport.
Yes. So there's one stamp of my exit from Delhi for the same date and one entry of the same date. Yes.
And then that one that's written OR Tambo.
Yes.
What is the valid date? What are the dates that appear on that stamp?
That's the 2nd of September 2013.
No, not that one. You're reading the one that's square, not the round one.
Okay, the square one is the 3rd of June 2013.
Yes, and then valid until?
This is till the 2nd of May 2015.
No, it's 20 May on mine.
Yeah, 20 May. Yeah, 20
Is it 20 May 2015?
Yes.
And then below that you've got conditions. What are the conditions?
It says work.
Work. And then we're going to come to this stamp, but we might just as well mention it. The one that's round, that's also written OR Tambo.
Yes.
What does that signify?
That's an exit stamp.
That is when you left South Africa.
That's correct,
To go back to New Delhi.
Yes.
And what was the date?
That's the 2nd of September 2013.
Yes, thank you. We're going to deal with that later in your evidence. So this is what you carried to South Africa coming in and out of the country.
Yes, that's correct.
Just for clarity's sake, am I correct, or is it so that you were never employed by Mr. Lakshmi Goyal's company?
No.
And is it also correct that Infinity Media Network is only a company that was in South Africa, or did it operate also in New Delhi?
To the best of my knowledge, there is no company called Infinity Media that works in India. The Infinity Media that I signed a contract for was a company that's in South Africa.
Yes. So if at the end of the day it is found that your entry did not comply with the laws of the country, it would apply to your visa and to all the other visas that were received by your colleagues at the time?
Yes.
Yes. I would like to take you just still on the visa issue. Before we leave it, I would like to refer the chairperson to Exhibit CC1D, Mr. Chairman, which is the big lever arch file. Next to you. These are the submissions by Mr. Apleni, who was the former Director General of Home Affairs.
Or maybe before you do that, just to... what was your understanding of what was meant by intra-company transfer?
What I was told at that time, after I had agreed to employment at Infinity, was that the class of visa which would allow me to work and have a temporary residence in South Africa is called an intra-company transfer. And I was told that since there's a joint venture between SL Media, which is a company that Mr. Lakshmi Goyal owned, and Mr. Gupta's company, or the Gupta family-owned company here, that it was a transfer between the two joint venture partners from one joint venture partner to the other. So it was all the same. It was all part of Infinity Media, but I was told since it was a company which was a joint venture, which had two different principals, so it was a transfer from one principal into the main company. So that was my understanding of what a intra-company transfer was. That is what I was told by Mr. Lakshmi Goyal at that time.
But the one company, to the extent that intra-company transfer meant that you were being transferred from within one part of the same company to another part of the same company. To the extent that that is what it meant. One, are you saying that you were not even employed by Infinity Media in India before you were employed by Infinity Media, in terms of which you were going to come to South Africa?
No, I had a contract with Infinity Media, which was valid from the 1st of May.
No,
but
I
was
accept
working
that. Before that
Before I was working for another company.
Yes.
I was working for Alpha Dealcom, which has got nothing to do with SL Media or any of that. That's a totally
Yes.
different entity.
And that company had nothing to do with Infinity Media, and it had nothing to do with any company that may have had a joint venture with Infinity Media.
No, it was a totally different entity.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Maybe just to still dealing with your visa issue, and just refer you, if I may refer the chairperson to Exhibit CC1D, which is the submission by Mr. Apleni, who was the former Director General of Home Affairs during that period. He has put up documents. I just want to refer you to a document that makes reference to your passport and your visa, and that will be at page 228.
That's 228 in the
Lever Arch file.
Lever Arch file.
Yes.
Okay. What
is
divider?
CC1D.
Which divider?
It will be under 9. Sorry, divider 9.
Okay. Okay, I've got it.
Yes, thank you. If I may refer you, Mr. Sundaram, to item 31 on that page. Have you found it? Are you there, Mr. Sundaram?
Yes, I am.
Yes, thank you. If you look at item 31, what is written there?
It has my name, Sundaram Rajesh, and it's got my passport number. And it's given the category of visa, which is intra-company transfer permit, issued on the 22nd of May 2013 and valid for 2 years. And it says it's valid/resigned.
Yes. We are, Mr. Chairman, we're going to deal with what prompted these investigations much later in Mr. Sundaram's evidence. But I just want to deal with the numbers and the visa itself at this stage. Just 50, if I may just... Sorry, I just want to take you to another page quickly. And then if you go to page 319 of that same bundle, that is the Exhibit CC1D, which is the Lever Arch file under item 9. If you look at page 319, that is the copy of your passport, am I correct? The one that you've just referred to earlier.
319, just getting that.
Yes, 319.
Yes, this is a copy of my passport.
And then if you turn over the page, that's page 320, you have a copy of your visa. Is that the same that we are dealing with?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it
Thank
is.
you. Yeah, that's the same. Thank you. We're going to, because you deal with the issues about Home Affairs much later in your statement, and I don't want to confuse issues. We're going to park this for a while, and I would like us to tell the Commission then about your arrival in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got your visa, you've got your passport, you are at the airport. It's the 2nd of June, 3rd of June when you left New Delhi, 2013.
Mm-hmm.
And when you arrived, where did you work?
When I arrived here, I was taken to a guest house which is owned by the Gupta family, and I would just want to give a short description of how it was.
Yes.
It was like a labor camp. There were 3 rooms and about 6 or 7 people who would stay there, and I was a little surprised, because both Arun and I were part of the senior management team, and we would have expected, or from our previous experience, to stay at a hotel probably till the time other arrangements were made. But we were put in this guest house which had one person from Nepal who was on a visit visa, who told us that he was being paid a salary in India, he was not getting a salary here, and he was to cook for all the laborers who had come from India who were engaged in the construction of the studio, and he had also to cook for the people 3 meals a day for the people who were staying at the guest house, and also to clean their clothes, to do all the housekeeping work, and he would not have a single rand to spend on himself, because all the money that he got was at Mr. Lakshmi Goyal's office in India, and that money was then sent, taken by his uncle and taken to Nepal from there. So it was a very shocking kind of an environment, because the bathroom there had clothes strewn all over the place, and it was a mess really. One of my colleagues who had come with me, Mr. Karun Thakur, was sent to another guest house, and he gave me a call in the middle of the night, on the same night that we arrived here, that there were rats running around that guest house. So, and he called me up and said, Mr. Sundaram, where have you got us? Is this the place that we're going to work? So yes, so that was a brief description of where we stayed. And then, of course, the office that I worked was the Midrand office of ANN7, which also housed the New Age newspaper as well. That is the office from which we worked. The New Age office, we were given a small space there on the first floor. On the same floor where Mr. Atul Gupta had an office, Mr. Nazim Hoa had an office, there was a conference room out of which we were working out of. The ANN7 studio at that time was still under construction, and we couldn't work from there. So the first few weeks we were working from the New Age office to the right of the compound.
Yes. If I may just take you quickly to paragraph 4 of your statement, that is Exhibit CC1A at page 1 of your statement.
Yes.
Yes. We're still going to deal with you having written your book. That's going to come last, because you did that after you left South Africa.
Yes.
So I will skip those paragraphs. I'm skipping them deliberately. Now, just tell us, then you get into South Africa and you start working in South Africa, and you telling the commission about what you discovered in paragraph 4. What is that?
Well, at the time of my employment, when I agreed to join Infinity Media, I was not told that there was, I was told there was a third partner, but I was told that that's a local entity. I was never told that that was the president's son, or the president had any interest in this. My decision to join would have been different, perhaps, if I'd known about it. But after I came in here, over a period of a few weeks, I was getting a sense that there is an involvement of the president in this entire project and operations, which was confirmed immediately after the first meeting that we had with the president. I was told at that time, unofficially, that Duduzani Zuma was one of the partners here. I was told there were 3 partners, one being Lakshmi Goyal, the Indian businessman, then the Gupta family, and the third was Duduzani. I was told at that time that each of them owned about 1/3 of the shares in the company, and that these were the 3 entities that owned the news station that I was setting up.
Yes. Now, because you have made the allegation, the commission had undertaken its own investigations. I would like to refer you, Mr. Chairman, may I refer you now to Exhibit CC1C, which is also one of the presentation files. And it's written additional information. Mr. Sundaram, could you have a look at that, Mr. Sundaram?
What page?
Could you turn to page 30, Mr. Chairman?
30?
30, that's correct, yes. Or maybe just to identify the document properly, I might want to just refer the chairperson to page, there's a stamp from the company. These are financial statements of Infinity Media, which were submitted to the Commission by KPMG. If I may refer the chairperson to page 7, just to identify the company that actually conducted the audit. Page 7, Mr. Chairman, of the same document. KPMG is written there, and it shows independent auditor's report. Page 7.
Hang on a second.
All right.
Well, what's the page number
page
of
7.
the whole exhibit?
The exhibit is CC1C, and then the page number would be Ed Info 007. 007.
007.
That's
007.
correct. 007, Mr. Chairman, yes.
Okay, yes, I've got
Yes,
that.
thank you. Just to identify the document properly, I would like the chairperson to have a look at the left-hand corner of this KPMG. So these are the auditors that submitted this information to the Commission. Now, if we turn then...
And it's written independent auditor's report.
That's correct.
Is there a date to it?
There is a date, Mr. Chairman. If you turn to page 8, page 8 has Mr. Vessels, who signed it, chartered accountant, registered
Yes.
auditor, director, 14 August 2015.
Yes, okay.
Thank you. And then if you may now turn to page 30.
Hang on
I
one
beg your pardon.
second.
Oh, sorry.
On the face of it, does it tell what company it relates to?
It does,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
It's addressed to the shareholders of Infinity
Infinity
Media
Media,
Networks
yes.
Proprietary Limited.
That's correct.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. And then at page 30, we have as a heading there, Infinity Media Networks Proprietary Limited, and then it has notes to the financial statements. But paragraph 20 is where I would like to draw the attention of the chairperson to, and the
Yes.
witness's attention. Mr. Sundaram, if you read in paragraph 20, you see the heading there is written what?
Related party transactions.
Yes, and then you have
Identity, I think. Identity of related parties, is that right?
That's on 20.1. Yes, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to read that
related
line.
party transactions.
That's
Yes,
correct.
no, that's fine, yes.
And then the second line has got number of shares. Do you see that? Number of
Yes,
shares?
yes.
Thank you. And then you have a percentage of holding. You see
Yes.
that? And then below that in 20.1, you have identity of related parties.
Yes.
Yes. There's related parties there, and then you have, I would just like to draw your attention to SL Media. You see that?
Yes.
And then SL Media has, what is the number of shares that it holds?
35%.
35%. And then you've got Joey's Proprietary Limited that holds,
9%.
and you've got, I skipped Oak Bay. Oak Bay Investment Proprietary, right? The first one, I beg your pardon.
That's 35%
That's
as well.
35%. And then you've got the next one, the last one.
Yeah, the
Well,
Mazingela.
hang on, Ms. Norman.
Yes, Mr.
Okay, let's do it
So we start from
in
the
the
beginning.
proper sequence. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
You keep on skipping.
I skipped
Yeah.
one. Okay, let's start from the beginning.
Yeah.
20.1, we've got the identity of related parties, all right?
Yes.
You see that? And then following that is the company's share capital as held by.
Yes.
Yes. And then the first company you have there is Oak Bay Investments Proprietary Limited.
Yes.
And what is the shareholding?
35%.
Yes. And then it's followed by SL Media. And
Yes.
what is the shareholding?
35%. This is Lakshmi Goyal's company.
Yes. And then we have Joey's Proprietary Limited. And what is the shareholding?
9%.
And then we have Mabengela Investments Proprietary Limited. And what is the shareholding?
21%.
21%. Now, that, because we have to satisfy ourselves that if we place that information It is in fact, because you've mentioned that it was Mr. Tutuzane Zuma's company, then the Commission looked at the information that is kept by CIPRO within the country. If I may just ask the chairperson to turn to page of the same bundle, if I may just give you the page where Mabengela Investments is dealt with. Sorry, maybe before we do that, Mr. Chairman, just as for sequence sake, at page 068 of the same document, you will find that that page is from CSI Company Trace, and then it's got the name of the company that was being searched there is Infinity Media Networks. Do you see that?
Yes.
On the same document. And then you will see that, just want you to identify whether the Mr. Gowell that you talk about is listed on there, or is there another Gowell, because there's two different spellings. You've got Arpit Goel, and then the third name, you've got Lakshmi Narain Goyal. Which one are you referring to?
Lakshmi Narayan Goel is the full name of Lakshmi Goel.
Lakshmi Goyal.
And Arpit Goel is his son. They are twins. So one of the twins is Arpit Goel.
Yes. And you have a list of names there of the people who were directors and those who subsequently resigned from that company. You see that?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
You said Mr. Arpit Goel. Mr. Arpit Goel is the son of Lakshmi Narain Goyal. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
But I see that the spelling is different. Arpit's spelling in terms of the surname is Goel, and the other one is Goyal. Do you know?
See, because in India there are certain surnames like Goel, Agarwal. They're spelt differently. So, but all of them are the same thing. You know, it's the same.
And everybody knows it's the same thing.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
It's a caste surname. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Sean. Then you've got a list of all those directors. You might want to just mention those names, please, for the record.
Arpit Goel, Christian Gauss, Lakshmi Narayan Goel, Atul Kumar Gupta, Varun Gupta, Nazim Hoa, Zamis Wazi Mandela, Zwanzele Jimimani,
Yes.
Futi Samuel Mosomani, Gary Naidu, and Muxim Williams.
Yes. Now, and then if I take you through to page 076, or just to complete that paragraph,
yes.
You see that there's director status, and next to the names that you've mentioned, there's ID number, director status, and appointment date of those persons.
Yes.
Okay? And then if you turn to page 076, I beg your pardon, Mr. Chairman.
I'm wondering whether, having read those names, you should say anything about the status, the director status. Some or all seem to have resigned.
Yes. I wanted to take him, let me take him to page 57.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm so sorry, I didn't ask whether we'll take the break at 11 or 11:15.
It's 11:15.
It's 11:15.
Yeah.
I beg your pardon. Thanks. Oh, if I take you then to page, page
We seem to have lost that connection, but they should be going to a break anytime soon anyway, but we'll go back as soon as we're able to. Let's take a break for now.
got resigned directors.
Yes.
And under that column, who are the directors' names that
The
you find there?
directors' names there are Abdul Wahab Jafar, who was appointed on 17/6/2008, and there's no date of resignation.
Yes.
Rajesh Kumar Gupta, appointment was on 08/07/2008, resigned on 01/03/2016. Duduzani Zuma, appointed 08/07/2008, resigned 07/04/2016.
Yes. Thank you. And then, lastly, if I may just take you to the same document, same page. What you've just read, if you go to page 084. That also deals with directorships in that were conducted on Mr. Duduzani Zuma. And then you have that 084, you see company name there.
Company name, yes,
What is that name?
Mabengela Investments.
Yes. And then you see the appointment date. It deals with, let me just take you to the first page, sorry. Sorry, maybe I should just take you, could you just go back, I beg your pardon. Page 077.
077.
Thank you, all right. On top there, what is the CIPC director that's written there, right on top?
Yeah, Duduzani Zuma.
Yes, and then you find there's a, in business, under in business, there's company name.
Yes.
And then do you see Mabengela there?
Yes, it is there at number 5.
The number 5. And then on the right hand, the director status?
Resigned.
Yes. And then that resigned, that position is reflected at page 084. Okay. And then you have Mabengela Investments there.
Yes.
And then you have appointment date.
Appointment date, yes, which is 08/07/2008.
And then the resignation date.
07/04/2016.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So then going back then to your statement that would you then be satisfied that the 30% that you had would actually be the 21% according to what the documents that we've gone through?
Yes.
Yes, and you would accept that?
Yes, based on these documents.
Yes, thank you. Then, what is it that made you say that you've heard that, well, the president's son was involved in this? Was there any involvement of either the president or the former president or his son that made you make this statement that you make in paragraph 4?
Well, what I found during my experience here was that although Duduzani Zuma was the person who was the director, was a shareholder in the company, it was President Zuma who was more actively involved in terms of the meetings that I had were more like a review by shareholders on the status of the project, on the television project, you know. So the reports that we gave there during those meetings were like shareholder meetings. Duduzani's involvement in the setting up of the station or the running of the business was minimal, I would say. You know, there was just one meeting where he had a small appearance, and there's not much in terms of business that he contributed to that meeting. But President Zuma was very much involved in the running of the station, in the sense that there were regular review meetings where a status update was given to him, and he would give feedback to that as well. Also, confidential information, which I, as somebody who set up many stations across in India, would know. You know, there's some confidential information which you don't really give out so early in the project. That was disclosed to the president. Now, I would have thought, as somebody when I did not know that of the president's son's involvement in this, I thought it was a little funny that you'd hand out a document which had all the secrets of the project to a public office and leave a presentation there with all those details, with so many people in his office would have access to that, and it could clearly have leaked. But they didn't really seem to care. I mean, they trusted him 100%. And it was only later on that I realized that it's because he had a much bigger interest in the station.
Yes. You deal with these meetings in detail in your supplementary statement.
Yes.
Maybe it's appropriate that we jump from what you've stated there to go so that we can deal with the meetings one by one,
Sure.
as you've done in your supplementary statement.
Yes.
May I refer the chairperson to CC1B at page 2 of the supplementary statement? Thank you. You deal with when was the first meeting where you say the president was present? Where was the meeting and who was present at the meeting? And you deal with the discussions at that meeting?
The first meeting that took place was on the 22nd of June 2013. The meeting took place at his residence in Pretoria, and the meeting was attended by a team from the New Age newspaper, as well as members of the Gupta family. To be very specific, there was Ajay Gupta, there was Atul Gupta there was Muhsin Williams, who was the head of the delegation in terms of the protocol. There was Nazim Hua. There was Arun Agarwal, who was the head of business from Mr. Lakshmi Goyal's side in this project, and there was me, who were part of the project. This entire meeting was coordinated by Mr. Ashu Chawla, and he too was part of the meeting.
Yes.
And from the president was there on his own. There were no other aides that were present during these meetings.
Yes. Just tell the chairperson, how did you get to be invited to this meeting? Just start from the beginning.
Okay.
Who called you to say you must attend, and how did you get there to the president's official residence?
Okay, so this was, I think this meeting took place just a few days after I arrived in South Africa. So about a week before this meeting, I was told by Mr. Atul Gupta that we would have a meeting with the president. At that time, I did not know that Duduzani was part of this, that he was a shareholder in the company. I was told that it's a formal meeting where we'd meet him and tell him about the project. So I thought that it's probably a formal interaction, with the head of state about a new media venture that's coming up, just to brief him about what it was. He asked me to prepare a presentation, a text presentation with, what were the differentiating features of the content that we proposed, how were we different in terms of the technology, how were we different in terms of the studio setup and design, and all the other features of the television station. So I prepared this. I was told to send the details to Mr. Aslam, who was part, I think he was the creative director at the New Age newspaper. I was asked to send him the details, and they said that he's going to dress up the presentation in terms of putting it into a spiral bind, cutting out pictures from the internet and kind of dressing it up in the sense. And Aslam was told to make 3 copies of the presentation, one which I would have in my hand, one which Mr. Atul Gupta and Ajay Gupta would have, and a copy of which would be presented to President Zuma at his residence. So these documents, I gave out the information. It was made into a PowerPoint presentation, and printouts were taken, spiral bound with a plastic sheet on top, and it looked like a proper business presentation, and we kept it ready. But every day I would think, we were told to prepare it. It's already prepared. When are we going to meet him? But we were told that the president was traveling outside of his base, and that he would come back. So he came back on a Saturday, and on the 22nd of June, which was a Sunday, we were given time at 9:30. I got a call on the Saturday evening from Mr. Atul Gupta, very late at night, when we had come back from work. And he told me that there's a meeting that's going to take place at 9:30 tomorrow. He said that there would be somebody who would pick us up from the Midrand office, that we should be there bright and early and reach the president's residence. I was also told that the others would follow in a convoy immediately afterwards. At that time, the next day, Arun and I, we were staying, we were sharing an apartment in Midrand. So we went straight to the office, got copies of the presentation with us. We were waiting, and Aslam told us that he would give our telephone number, our car number to the President's office through Mr. Ashu Chawla, so that we wouldn't have any issue getting in. It was a car from the fleet of the Gupta family, and we gave that number, Aslam gave that number to Ashu Chawla, who then gave it to the President's office.
Excuse me, sorry, Mr. Chairperson, it's 11:15. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. We'll take the short adjournment, tea adjournment, and we will resume at 11:30. We adjourn.
All right.
Well, as the judge has ordered, we're going to take a break. The agenda will be back in a moment. Stay with us.
What are you predicting with the sixth parliament?
They've got to up their game.
Why is it so important?
Ms. Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Sundaram. Yes, would you then proceed? You got a call and you were told that someone was going to fetch you to the meeting. Yes. Yes. Could you continue from there?
Just switch on your mic.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Yes.
So I was told that somebody would come and fetch me. We were asked to report at the Midrand office, which we did in the morning. So at the appointed time, there was a driver from the Gupta family's fleet of cars that had come in there. So I still remember that he greeted us with something that people in rural India greet each other with, So we were a little surprised because here's a white South African person, and he's greeting us in a way that they would in rural India. So
how did he greet you?
He said Ram Ram. So
Ram Ram.
Yes.
Yes.
So and then he had on the car stereo, he had a lot of Hindi music playing, which me and which Arun and I, we didn't particularly like, so we asked him to switch back to the station. Of course, we reached President Zuma's residence ahead of time, and as we had been told earlier, the vehicle number had already been given. We were flagged in, and we didn't have much difficulty finding a way into a waiting room where we found Mr. Ashu Chawla. One thing that did strike me was the relative lack of security, because I had gone to interview heads of state before and have covered them at various countries, and here I found that there was nobody who sought our passports or identity details before we were allowed in. None of the bags that were being taken were put under an X-ray scanner. I mean, there's more security here that I see than there at the President's residence. I don't know if it was a special consideration to us since we were part of the Gupta delegation, or if security is generally not required to be very high in South Africa as it is in South Asia, where I've basically reported and seen this. Also, we were ushered into this room to the right of the entrance of the building, and that was not a general waiting area, because I saw that only the delegation that had come with the Gupta family was to use that room. When we entered that room, Arun Agarwal and I, we found Ashu Chawla already sitting there with his phone plugged into the wall socket, it was charging. And he seemed a little anxious, and he was answering all the questions that we were asking him. This was the first time I was meeting Ashu Chawla. I've heard a lot about him, about how he's the point person at the President's office. Any work that needed to be done in terms of visas or any of that, he was the guy who'd speed things up for the Guptas. We were also told that Muhsin Williams, Nazim Hoa, Atul and Ajay Gupta would be traveling in a convoy and would reach sometime after we had reached for that meeting. And true enough, they came in a few minutes later, and Atul Gupta was from the very beginning very impatient about the fact that he wanted to start the meeting and get it over with quickly. The president, of course, had been out of Pretoria for a few days, and he had a series of meetings. When I came in, I realized that there were a lot of cars parked outside. So a few of the ministers had also come in for pending work that needed to be addressed urgently. And he was in another room, we were told, conducting meetings. So Atul, Ajay Gupta would keep telling Ashu Chawla to go to the president's office and tell them that the Gupta brothers were waiting. At one point, I think about half an hour into the waiting time, he got very impatient and said that, we can't be waiting here forever, the president can't make us wait. So he asked Ashu Chawla to go and tell the president's office that we're going now. Ashu Chawla came back in a few minutes and he said, well, please wait because the president's coming out of the meeting that he's in right now and he will come here very shortly. And within a few minutes, President Zuma came into the meeting room. He was apologetic. He said he was sorry that he had a lot of guests that day and a lot of pending work that needed to be done. Although it was a Sunday, it had been a heavy morning for him. And he came in and sat down. So there was a certain protocol that was followed for these meetings, at his residence. The president sat on a particular chair. Then the head of the delegation, which was Muxim Williams, sat in the chair next to him. Then Nazim Hoa, and then the Gupta brothers would sit on a couch opposite them. And then across the table from there is where Arun Agarwal and I sat for these meetings. So the very first meeting started off like this, and we found it a little funny, because when we were told that we will go to the president's house and have a meeting for 2 hours, Arun and I, who had come in from India, we were a little, we thought it was a little funny that the head of state would have 2 hours to dedicate to a new media television station which has not even started yet. And we thought that that Atul Gupta was probably exaggerating, that we'd probably get 5 minutes with the president and we'd be ushered out. But at the end of that meeting, we were really surprised because not only did the president take a very detailed briefing about the project, he asked us questions, kept a copy of the report with him and said that he's going to keep the copy, study it, and next time when we meet, he would ask a few more questions and give a few more suggestions.
Just on that, what exactly did you present to the former president at that meeting? That is, we're talking about the first meeting.
Okay, so we presented to him what we were told by Atul Gupta, which is an outlook on how the station would be, because we had already commissioned the design of the studio, we'd already commissioned the logo and the name and all of that. So the logo was commissioned. Also, a status report on how the project was headed, the various things about procurement of equipment to the design and fabrication of the studio, a status report really on how things were. Also, he wanted me to prepare a note on how the content of this television station would be different from what already exists in South Africa. So in terms of the look and feel of the station, how are we going to be different there? So it was, in a sense, a report which had all the details about the station. It was a status update on where the project was at, something of a shareholder review kind of a presentation, more than a kind of presentation that you would give the head of state on a formal kind of a meeting. So
at that point, the name of the station was already known?
Yes.
It had been decided?
Yes.
Okay. Were you present when this decision was taken as to what the station was going to be called?
No, I was not present when that decision was taken, but I believe there was a meeting before the first meeting, before the first meeting that I went into, where President Zuma and the Gupta brothers had a meeting, perhaps with Nazim and Muxim, where the president had suggested to them that it should be called, like CNN, it should be ANN, Africa News Network, where there would be an African perspective of news, to international news. Like CNN was an Atlanta-centric perspective of world news, an American journalist from China, India, Africa, telling the world about what is happening there. The idea was to have an Africa news network, much on the same lines, where a South African journalist would, to start with, would report on South Africa, but the idea was to have a South African journalist reporting from across the world, much like what CNN was doing. And when the first meeting happened, I very distinctly remember Mr. Ajay Gupta telling the president that, look, sir, we're calling it ANN 7, and this is just like you suggested. And we're putting a 7 because ANN was already taken, so we did the next best thing, which is put a numeric at the end of it, and we found that name was not taken, so we decided to take that. And President Zuma seemed to appreciate that a lot. Also, I think this is something that they played a lot during these meetings. They would keep telling me that the president, when you speak with him, should feel like whatever he's said we are listening to it and we're executing that. But they would also say that we will listen to what he says, and if we like it, we'll execute it. If not, we won't. So that was a sense that I was getting about how they were dealing with President Zuma. Also, I got a sense that they had a very good rapport with the president. They had very good ties. When we went into these 3 meetings, there was occasion when we were in a visiting room, and there would be relatives of the president, his daughter, in one instance I remember, and they greeted him each other very warmly. The Gupta brothers seemed to know everybody in the family on a first name basis, almost like they were family. So that's something that I found in these meetings. Also, President Zuma was very warm to them. I would also, I think, significantly say that these meetings happened after the Waterkloof incident. So if at all I had any doubts in my mind whether that had soured relationships, the relationship between the president and the Gupta family, I would say no, absolutely not, because the warmth with which they met in those meetings, there was nothing that would indicate that the Waterkloof incident had any impact on the relationship that they shared.
Yes. So then, so we're still at the first meeting.
Yes.
So these discussions are taking place. What was the end result of that meeting? What was resolved at that meeting?
Well, these meetings were cut up into 2 parts. The first part was where the television team would present to the president the status on how the project was proceeding. The second half was the New Age and other businesses which the Gupta brothers wanted to discuss. And during the second part, Arun Agarwal and I were asked to move out of the meeting and stay out because that was something that they didn't want us to be part of. So at the end of the first meeting, the presentation was given. The president said that he's going to take a look at the presentation. He asked us to leave a copy with him. And he said that when we meet next, he is going to give us feedback on the same, suggestions, and also how we could improve this further.
Yes. And then, so then after that meeting, then I would take it that you left. When you left, did you all go?
We all went together because we had come in our car and we had gone back in the same car. The other parts of the delegation, which is the Gupta brothers, Muxim Williams, and Nazim Hoa and Ashu Chawla, came afterwards. But what I found out from the conversation that we had, post that meeting, was that there were other issues related to the New Age advertising and also the TNA business briefings that were aired on SABC were also discussed. If there were certain ministers who they had difficulty approaching to get for those interactions, they would ask President Zuma to use his influence to get them in there. Also, if they wanted a particular ministry to pay for the venue and details like that, and there was reluctance there, they would go to him to get that thing sorted out. Yes.
When you arrived at this meeting, were you formally introduced to the former president?
Yes, I was, because, like I said, there was a pecking order, there was a protocol there. So Muxim Williams was the one who was heading the delegation. The Gupta brothers then introduced, I think it was Ajay Gupta, if I'm not mistaken. He said that there are 2 new people here for this meeting, and then he introduced Arun Agarwal and me to the president. So he greeted us very warmly. They shook our hands and sat down on his chair before the meeting started.
So other than you then making a presentation to him as to what you had done and what your plans were about the station, did the president give you any input to it, or did he simply say, look, thank you, I will consider what you've put up and I'll get back to you?
To the best of my knowledge, in the very first meeting, there were, since he had come in from that meeting and also he had come back after some time, he had taken the document from us and said that he's going to get back with more inputs as we go along.
All right.
So he did not make any input or any substantive input at that meeting to the presentation?
If I'm given permission to refer to the contents of my book, because that is based on a diary that I was maintaining at that time and an immediate recollection, because this was written in 2013. If I'm given permission,
yes,
I would just want to cross-check this. And
you can do that.
Thank you, Mr.
That relates to the first meeting, eh?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, you can do that.
You quote from your book there, Mr. Sundaram, if I may just direct your attention. You quote from your book starting from page 4.
Yes.
Yes. Paragraph 18, paragraph 19.1. Yes. You're quoting from pages 94 to 104 of your book.
Yes.
Yes. Where exactly do you want to make the reference? Or do you just want to... You've dealt with what happened...
I think he just wants to have a...
Yeah, just
to run through his
to run
eyes
through it.
and,
All right.
and see
just to jog my memory
refresh your
to see.
memory.
All right,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Yes, do that.
Thank you.
Or what we can do...
So just direct him to
What we can do, we can move on, and during the lunch break, you can just have a look.
Yes.
And after lunch, you can tell us whatever you picked up.
Sure.
Is that all right?
I'll do that. I will do that.
Yes. But what I do want to ask you is, how long did that meeting take? You told us that the president
Yes.
had come from another meeting which he had left before it could finish. And I understand you to say he was going to go back to that meeting.
Yes.
So how long did the meeting with you and the Gupta delegation last?
See, with the television team, which is with Arun Agarwal and I, we were there for about an hour, and after we left, it continued for another hour and a half maybe. So about 2 or 2.5 hours on that day, the president spent with the Gupta delegation.
Yes, but is my understanding of your evidence correct? And part of it might be because I've read your statement and maybe you haven't said so. Is my understanding correct that the president was still to go back to the meeting from which he had come?
Yes, and he said that there were some ministers who were also waiting in the other room in the meeting where he had come from.
Yes, so he spent about an hour in regard to the first part, or what you call the first part of the meeting.
Yes.
And after you and somebody else had been asked to leave the meeting, it was another hour before the meeting was
That's correct.
concluded.
Yes.
Now, after you had left the meeting, did you wait for the other members of the delegation until they had finished with the other part of the meeting?
No, since we had come in our own car, we left from there because there was other work that had to be done. So we left from there. But when they came back, when the remainder of the delegation came back, we sat together, and I could hear from them what had happened and what was discussed and things like that. So what I remember from that discussion is about talking to the president about the New Age newspaper, about business related to that, also business related to the other businesses, and also what I remember distinctly is about certain of his ministerial colleagues to influence them through the president to come and attend the TNA, the breakfast briefing that were taking place. What I understood was that they were finding a reluctance or some resistance from some of the ministers to attend them, especially after Waterkloof. The Gupta name, many of the ministers didn't want to associate with and want to come there because, the SABC, the business briefings that were aired on SABC had Atul Gupta, who was a very prominent fixture there. So he would be on the main table, and the dignitary who would come had to sit on the same table with him in full public glare because this was telecast live on SABC. So some of the ministers had some reservation about doing that, especially since there was a lot of bad press that the Gupta family was getting. But this was something which was a very profitable venture for the Guptas and the New Age. So they thought that this would be affected, and they wanted the president to ask his ministerial colleagues to come in and attend those briefings because they didn't want the profitability of that venture to stop in any way.
Well, if after the first part of your meeting, you took your car and left, you wouldn't have known how long the second part of the meeting took.
Well, because, when they came back to office, I had asked, and we had found out that it was about another hour, between an hour and a half that they'd spent. So I have, I remember those meetings. When they came back, there were reviews. There was something called the executive committee meetings that were happened where we exchanged notes and.
Yes, but it's not like you saw when they came out of the meeting.
No,
if you hadn't left and you were waiting outside and waiting for them to come out and they came out, then I would know
for sure.
Yes,
yeah. But I'm basing it on the information input that I got.
On the discussion that subsequently happened.
Yes.
But you also mentioned that what you have written in your book in regard to that first meeting, and I assume in regard to other meetings that you talk about in your statement as well, is based on a diary that where you made entries at the time. Is that correct?
I wouldn't call it a diary, but there were various documents, some mails that were sent out where I could refer the dates to.
Yes.
So it was not a diary.
It was not a diary.
It was not a diary, but it was a bunch of documents or, certain things that I could remember.
Yes.
Like the 22nd of, like for instance, the last meeting that I had with him, I remember because that was one day before the launch. So
yes.
I can just go back and say that the date is this because this was the date of the launch and I came back. So.
Okay. Otherwise, there was no contemporaneous record of what had been discussed.
See, I wrote the manuscript of this book within a few months of leaving South Africa.
Yes.
So it was fresh in my memory at that time, and it was all written at that time and put there. So the book was released in last year, March, but the manuscript was ready in 2013, and there were certain challenges that were there, so it couldn't come out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe just to take you back to paragraph 19.1 of your statement, that's where you're quoting from the book?
Yes.
Yes. There's something that you mentioned there as to number 9, and who is number 9 and why do you make reference to a number 9 in that paragraph?
Yes.
That's page 5.
Yes, because, they had said that the entire meeting with President Zuma should be kept as secretive as possible, and there should be a lot of confidentiality around it. But of course, what they said is that if we do discuss about the meeting, because we had to make a presentation and the inputs had to be discussed with the senior management, and if you're discussing before others, we should not mention the president by name. That's what Atul Gupta said. He said we should refer to him as number 9. So I found that a little intriguing and asked him, why number 9, why not number 3 or number 7 or number 10? He said number 9 was the code that was given to President Zuma when he was part of the ANC, and he was part of an intelligence grouping during the apartheid years, and that's a code name that he would want to use in this case. And whenever he called me up, like for instance, when he called me up the day before the meeting, he said, we have to meet number 9 tomorrow at 9:30. He didn't refer him by name. So they had told us that it should not be mentioned to anybody, not with the team in India, not with the team in South Africa, and it should be just these 4 or 5 people who were part of the entire planning, plus Aslam, who was a close confidant, who would, finally give a form to the presentation in terms of, printing it out and putting the photographs and the logos and all of that.
Thank you. Maybe I'll just have to take you back and just looking at the quotations that you make from the book.
Yes.
Because I think these matters are quite important. Now, were you offered when you entered, because you simply went to when then the president entered the room, but I want to know, were you offered any beverages whilst you were waiting for the president?
Yes, we had a lady from the president's office who came in and asked us, if anybody would need any beverages, and that was in that waiting room, which was to the right of the entrance. There were people who had ordered their beverages. They came and it was consumed. Also, I think I remember at that time Atul Gupta had very jokingly said that you journalists, you don't have any issues, taking hospitality on taxpayers' money. So then I had told him that well, I pay my taxes here as well, so there's no reason for us to. And then he made a claim at that time. He said that while many companies in India fudge their account books, there's one set of accounts that they have for internal consumption and one set of accounts that is for the tax department, which meant that there was a lot of fudging that was happening. He claimed at that time that they did not do any fudging in their businesses here in South Africa. So, but of course, that was just the small talk that was happening while we were waiting for the president.
Yes, and then you make mention of what happened when Mr. Ashu Chawla sprang to his feet to touch someone else's feet. Could you just explain to the chairperson what that was all about?
Well, I think there was, that's part of the feudal culture in India is for you to go and touch the feet. I wouldn't call it a feudal culture, but it's also a respect to the elders, where you go and touch people's feet. But, it's something that's looked down upon in India, especially in a corporate kind of a setup. In a family setup where sons routinely touch the feet of their parents or their uncles and aunts, but it's generally not the done thing in an office, in a professional environment. But what I found there was that people were supposed to reaffirm their loyalty to the Gupta brothers by touching their feet, especially the loyalists, like Aslam would do that very regularly. Also, Ashu Chawla was somebody who would touch the brothers' feet every time that he saw them. And they would very reluctantly ask them to set up. Of course, when somebody touches your feet, you're supposed to bless them and say that may you have a long life or whatever. But they would just ask him to get up and move. But this was part of the culture there. There were many people who had come from India who were working with the Gupta family for many years, who thought nothing wrong in touching the brothers' feet when they saw them. And that's what Ashu did as well. As soon as Ajay Gupta and Atul Gupta came in, he bowed to touch their feet.
Yes. You meant...
I'm sorry.
I beg your pardon.
Is it you touch their feet if they are barefoot, or touch their shoes if they are, or do you only do that if they are barefoot?
No, it's just a sign of respect, So regardless of whether they're wearing the shoes or not, you're supposed to touch their, yeah.
Thank you. And I just want to deal now with your input as consultant editor, you in the planning of all of this, you mentioned in some of the quotations from the book that there's something that Atul wanted, lots of graphics, which you felt that was less sophisticated. Could you just deal with that aspect so that we can see what your contribution really was insofar as setting up a station was? Yes.
All right. No, that's just a conversation that I had while we were waiting for the president. You know, there was a television set in which, and there was a DSTV remote that he had in his hand. He would flip channels, various television channels, and he said that he liked the television station that we were about to set up to have a lot of clutter on the screen. He said he wanted to dazzle the people of South Africa. Well, I suggested to him that it was much, you just have two eyes and you can focus on one thing on the screen. So it's best to have a minimal approach when it came to the elements on the screen. But he insisted there that he would want like a top band, bottom band, the lower third to have multiple layers, to even have a band on the side which will have more details, which is something that some channels in India, the Hindi stations, do. So I tried to reason with him at that time that that's not how it should be done, and that's not how contemporary styling is, because minimal is good, less is more when it comes to television, because you can't overuse the graphics. He, of course, had a disagreement on that. Coming to my scope of work in all of this, it was basically I was the glue that was supposed to hold the whole thing together in terms of the editorial process, the editorial employees, the technical staff, the broadcast staff, the vendors who were to come in, the trainers from the vendor side who would come in, make sure that everything happened in a pre-planned sequential way, so that the launch was flawless. But what I found was that I encountered at every step a very suspicious Atul Gupta who would want things to be done quicker than what the professionals were suggesting to him. To give you an analogy of the construction industry, if a wall takes 5 days to construct, you're supposed to put the bricks and then, there's cement, there's curing that takes place. Without understanding the process, you'd say, I want to get that done in 1 day. And if somebody tried to reason with him, he'd say that, oh, that's an excuse, you're just delaying it for me. They were in a tearing hurry to set the station up. And now I realize it was because they wanted to have the station up and running. They didn't really care how the content was. It was just that they wanted to start making profits as soon as possible and channel that as dividends to the stakeholders. So really the content or the look and feel of the station was secondary. It was just get it up as soon as possible and get it started, get the government departments to give you revenues, and that's what the tearing hurry was about.
Thank you. And then in paragraph 19.36, if you may just have a look, that's where you deal with your direct interaction with the president at that meeting. Could you just look at that and testify to it, please?
What page is that?
At page 14. 1.4, yes.
That relates to the first meeting still.
It's still the first meeting.
Yeah.
Paragraph 19.36.
Yes, see, because President Zuma, one of the mandates that I had for this meeting was to also tell him how the content is going to be differentiated. So what I saw, and I had very little time to see what the competition was, I saw that, there had to be a fairer representation for the provinces, and which is what he agreed to as well. So we said that we're going to have, of course, the name being Africa News Network, we said that we'll have a correspondent in each part of Africa, in as many of the cities as possible. Also, there would be representation in terms of reporting staff in the provinces, and there would be a provincial bulletin that would come out once or twice a day. There would be an Africa bulletin that would be part of it, apart from the rolling bulletins that would go throughout the day. In terms of programming, we had told him the kind of emphasis that we had on sports and international news and entertainment and lifestyle. I explained to him how we would get the international news through subscription to various agencies. Also, these agencies had specific feeds on say, Hollywood, and how we would get the latest footage from there. And also, in terms of sports, the kind of coverage that we planned, kind of bulletins, and how those bulletins would be not just an anchor sitting behind a desk and reading off a teleprompter, but the different elements of the studio and how we would use that to make it different. So, he will listen to all of this very intently, and he was very impressed by the fact that we would have emphasis on the provinces more, news from the provinces, because he said that that's something that the competition was not doing, and that's what was required for him. Also, the fact that we would have reporters in the various capitals across Africa was something that he found interesting as well, I remember.
Yes, and then there's some interaction in paragraph 19.38. Could you just tell the chairperson about that?
Yes, so this is something that he said we shouldn't have, that he thought that he mentioned the channel by name ENC, and he said that that station had a lot of repetition of bulletins at that time, and he said that that's something that he found very boring. So he said, you should have a lot of fresh bulletins, and each bulletin should not be the same set behind them and the same camera angles, but it should have as many it should be as different as possible. So if you have a set, so then I explained to him about how we had multiple camera angles that were possible, multiple backgrounds that were possible. So it was not just LED screens in the back, but you could actually have people, the entire newsroom buzzing in the background, and you could have an anchor reading a news bulletin from there. So I explained all of that to him. I also remember that he had an aversion for the humorous programming that was there, the program featuring a puppet, which he said that there should be no lampooning of politicians. He absolutely hated that, and he said, you should not have that on your station, because that's something, he said that there should be no lampooning of politicians, that really shouldn't be done, and he said that I forbid anybody from having that on the station. So we all laughed it off, but of course I was told later that if he said doesn't want it, then we cannot have any of that on air.
Yes. So then after that, then you left the meeting, after all these interactions?
Yes.
You left the presentation and you left?
Yes.
Could you please tell the chairperson then about the second meeting, how it came about and what was the purpose of that meeting?
I'm sorry. Maybe you should make the point that's made in paragraph 19.34. 19.34, page 14.
Oh, yes. I think he had, yes. At page 14. Are you there?
And actually...
maybe just read.
Actually, 19.33, he may have answered in part when I asked him a question, but I think it's important.
All right. May he then be allowed to just read those paragraphs, Mr. Chairperson? Because
yes, he can read them. Yeah.
Yes, okay. 19.33, 19.34.
Ajay introduced me and Arun. This is Rajesh Sundaram. He's the editor of the television project, and this is Arun Agarwal. Arunji is the business head. They have both come from India recently and have many years of experience working with large international networks. The other gentleman, I soon have to go back to the meeting I left behind. I know there are a lot of things to discuss, but like they say in Zulu, we must skin the animal today. We will leave the rest for later, President Zuma said. Sir, I will ask Rajesh to give you a quick overview of the project. He will answer any questions you may have, and then we'll ask the TV team to leave, and we can discuss issues related to the newspaper. Ajay said, pointing to me. I handed President Zuma a copy of the presentation. 19.34. See the logo on the presentation, sir. It's ANN7. Like you said, we are calling the channel Africa News Network. We are following all the things you told us, sir. Ajay told President Zuma and pointed to the logo. The president seemed impressed.
Yes.
And then I think for the sake of completeness, you can read 19.35.
He smiled at Ajay in acknowledgement. This will be the most technologically advanced television station in South Africa. The broadcast, newsroom automation, and production systems we have are used by the top news networks of the world. Our news gathering reach will be the widest among our peers, with bureaus, studios, and live studios proposed in every province. Live sources, proposed in every province.
Now, after the first sentence in paragraph 19.35, the first sentence says he smiled at IJ in acknowledgement. Then after that, you seem to open quotations.
Yes.
I don't see where you close the quotations. But before we look at that, who is talking after that?
That's me, because I've been asked to make a presentation to him and tell him.
Oh, that's you talking now.
Yes,
there.
yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you. So the quotation closes on 19.36. That's where I say.
Okay, no, that's fine. You can continue.
You're happy with that? Yes.
Or does it go up to 19.42?
Yes, would you perhaps prefer that he reads all of that, Mr. Chairperson?
No, not necessarily.
So
I just wanted to the extent that,
I
thought somebody was being quoted, and I wanted to know how far.
Yes, that it goes. Oh,
okay, no, that's your presentation.
Oh, that's correct.
But is my understanding correct that you quote your presentation up to the end of paragraph 19.42?
Yes.
Just have a look at the end of.
Yes, before the second meeting. Yes. Maybe you could make the statement that you make in paragraph 19.40.
Yes.
Yes.
Want me to read that?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I actually think, he must tell us important features of that presentation to the extent that he might not have. If whatever he has already dealt with, he doesn't need to repeat. But I think 1940 seems to be important, as well as 1939.
Yes.
19.39. Maybe he could start at 19.39. Maybe he should start at 19.38.
That he has already dealt with.
Or he has taken care of that.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So then 19.39.
Okay.
Yes.
And 19.40.
Okay.
You can just read that.
Okay. 19.37 has a few details about how technologically we'd be different in terms of the robotic cameras, state-of-the-art production control room, and all of that, which I explained there. Coming to 10.39.
Yes.
19.39, sorry.
Yes.
As we rose to leave, President Zuma got up too and warmly shook our hands. He then walked us to the door and shook hands again before we left. All three meetings I had with President Zuma ended this way. Nazim, Muqsim, Ajay, and Atul stayed on. I was told later by a member of the New Age marketing team that these discussions were crucial for the paper to get government advertising and bring hard to convince ministers and officials in as guests on the New Age business briefing. So this is something which I had explained earlier as well. So they were very open about it, the people who were looking at the marketing of the New Age, that these meetings were crucial from a revenue standpoint for the newspaper, because this is where they did the convincing about getting advertising. I remember, which I mentioned in another part of my statement here, is that there was one particular meeting I remember where Mr. Ajay Gupta was very agitated about the fact the Independent Election Commission had multi-million rand budget for advertising, but they were not giving any of that to the New Age. So they took it up to the president in one of the meetings and very strongly put forth to him that the Independent Election Commission was not giving a share of the pie to the New Age, and they were assured at that time that the president would look into the matter. So the point I'm making is that these meetings are very crucial from a revenue standpoint for the New Age newspaper.
Yes. And then
Okay.
the chairperson asked you to look at 19.40 as well.
40.
Yes.
After the Waterkloof scandal, some ministers and officials seemed reluctant to be seen in public with Atul or on a platform hosted by his newspaper. These ministers and officials were convinced after a nudge from the president, Atul told me. The bad press and public outcry following the incident did not seem to have made any difference to the relationship between President Zuma and the Gupta brothers. In the 3 meetings with President Zuma that I was part of, the two brothers bonded well with the president and joked occasionally about the scandal. It was like nothing had happened. So they even made jokes about the scandal, I remember when the president would say something, he'd say, oh, but then this happened during Waterkloof, I'll not be allowed to get guests now, things like that, which the president didn't seem to mind, and they would have a hearty laugh about it as well. So, and also there was a reluctance among many ministers to be seen on the same platform. And they did seem to come later because they were convinced to come for these meetings.
Thank you. And then 19.42, because in 19.41, this is what you've just covered about the
For one,
relations.
that's a continuation. The brothers had
yes.
fairly free access to the president's residence, and Zuma left his ministers waiting for hours to attend the meeting with the Guptas. Atul once showed me newspaper clippings of President Zuma defending his friendship with the Gupta family in Parliament. Zuma was forced to publicly defend his relationship with the Guptas for the first time since the plane landing scandal, dismissing all allegations against him in relation to the Guptas as rumors, he said. See, I told you, the bond that we have with the president is deep.
Who was saying that?
This is Atul.
Okay.
Thank you.
4-2 now.
Yes.
The media and the DA will try its best to create a rift between us, but he will stand by us like a rock. The president will defend us always, he said, showing me the newspaper clipping. I found the discussion of commercial issues of the New Age and ANN7 intriguing. There had been a lot of noise about the New Age and the way the government supported it, and it seemed to me that these discussions were probably around a similar kind of support for ANN7.
Yes. And this noise you would have seen or heard yourself?
No, when I say about this noise, it's basically on social media,
yes.
And some sections of the mainstream media would also suggest some of it, but mostly on social media, where there would be people who are opinion makers who I would trust, who would question how this newspaper, which was not audited in terms of its circulation, would command a rate which it did, and how there were certain government departments and agencies which would actually give it the rates that it was commanding, despite not having any audited circulation figures.
Thank you. So then you left the first meeting. Could you please tell the chairperson about the second meeting?
The second meeting, I'm sorry, I do not remember the date, but it was in
yes.
July 2013. It was again a Sunday. So this was a day where the president was relatively free, and he asked us to come in the morning. This time,
The first meeting had been in June, you said, is that right?
Yes.
The first one?
Yes.
So
On
the second one was in July?
July.
Okay, all
yes.
right.
And the meeting was attended exactly by the same people, which is Ajay and Atul Gupta. There was Nazim Hoa, there was Muxim Williams, there was Arun Agarwal, me, and it was coordinated by Ashu Chawla, who also sat in during the meeting. And this time around, we were told that we'd be picked up, if I remember correctly, by Ashu Chawla. So, and the thrust of the second meeting was on...
I'm sorry, the first meeting, I think you said, was on a Sunday.
Yes.
Right? And the second meeting was also on a Sunday?
On a Sunday, yes.
Okay, all right.
But this time in the month of July 2013. I do not remember the exact date because, I hadn't been, there was no reference that I had for these meetings.
Where did Mr. Chawla pick you up?
He picked us up from Midrand office, and we moved from there, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Before you went to the meeting, were you told what this meeting was intended to be about?
We were told that it will be much on the lines of the first meeting, where there would be a review of what had happened so far. And we were also told that
just a follow-up meeting.
A follow-up meeting, and also there would be inputs that we'd get from the President based on the presentation that we'd given him.
Okay.
Also, some guidelines on editorial matters as well. So that's something that was told.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that's what you deal with in paragraph 22 at page 17.
Yes. So the meeting reviewed the progress of various aspects of the project, like the construction of the studio, the arrival of broadcast equipment.
I'm sorry, do you remember around what time the meeting would have started? I think the first one you said was for 9:30, but you came there and you waited for quite some time before it started.
Yes. To the best of my knowledge, this was also in the morning. It was a morning appointment.
Okay.
There was a third appointment, which I remember distinctly, was in the evening.
Okay.
Because that was the time when we were told in the morning and we had quickly leave.
Thank you.
Let's just talk about editorial policy. Who would ordinarily be responsible for determining editorial policy?
What most stations do is that they do not have the editorial policy on the fly. It's a document which is already created and which is the Bible as far as what journalists need to follow, so that they don't have to go back to the editor every time they have a decision to make. It's a document that is to be kept ready and given to each new recruit who comes in, and it should factor in things like how the news there should be a sense of balance in the news. If there are three parties to a particular news story that you're doing, all three should be given adequate representation in the news report that is there in terms of their comment. If there are charges brought out against a particular person, then he should be given a right to respond to those charges. If he doesn't respond, then that should be entered into the things. So things like this, which would ensure a balance, a sense of neutrality, are part of the editorial policy. But what I found here was that it was more of a propaganda station that they wanted to set up rather than a professional television station for news. Because right in this meeting, we were told that this should be a station that should not just be centered around the African National Congress, but to the close coterie around President Zuma. So he would tell us things like how...
Hang on, Mr. Sundaram. I think the question is, ordinarily, who would be responsible for formulating editorial policy?
It will have to be the editor and the senior editorial team, and nobody else, the professional editors, the journalists.
And that, as far as you know, is universal?
Yes.
Almost universal?
Yeah, that should be the case and for most professional stations and newspapers.
Okay, and that has been your experience in the various media houses in which you have worked?
Absolutely, yes.
Oh, okay. Ms. Nam,
yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And also because you, as a consulting editor and the editorial team, you would be responsible for the editorial policy, you would also make sure that the independence of the media, journalism and everything else, and ethical issues to be adhered to would be incorporated in that policy. Am I right?
Well, when I came in here, I was told that the editorial policy is something that I shouldn't be looking at. It was already decided by the New Age editorial policy, and we'd be following the same thing. So for me, I understood at that time that my role in this station would be in terms of just setting it up, and I had decided pretty early on that I would leave because there was no position for an editor in this station. They just wanted a rubber stamp, which I thought I wouldn't be. But I was told clearly that they would be following an editorial policy, which was something that was found on the website of the New Age, and that's pretty much what it would be. And of course, there was guidance that the President was supposed to give us, where he said that this would be a station that would not just look at the ANC and propagate its part of the story, but within the ANC, the team, the coterie around President Zuma was to be highlighted and put out. Also, he said that we should not engage in any direct propaganda in terms of negative stories against the rivals. He said that it should be done in a subtle fashion, so that the credibility of the station is also maintained, and at the same time, you do the propaganda that is intended behind the station.
You use the word guidance. Is that your own word, or is that what you were told the former president was going to give? Is it your own word that you attached to what you were told he was going to give, or is it the word that was used to tell you what he would do?
A balance.
Guidance.
Which word?
I thought you guidance. I thought you said
Yeah, guidance.
you were told that.
Yes, see, we were told, because Ajay Gupta would say that please listen to the president carefully, because we would want to convey to him, or we would want the president to know that we value what he's saying very much. So the message that goes to the president is that we are following his guidelines, that he's the boss, we are following his guidelines. But he'd also tell me that we don't have to listen to everything that he says. We just need to tell him on his face that, we're going by what he said. But if we like it, we take it. If we don't, we don't. But which meant that, I had no independent decision-making authority in that. It is, if the Guptas liked it, they would take it. If they're not, they wouldn't. But on his face, they would say, sir, this is what you suggested and this is what you're doing. So that's the idea that I had about it. And of course, President Zuma's guidance is something that they wanted me as the editor to listen to and implement, but subject to final approval from the Guptas.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then, so the second meeting then, because you had given the former president the presentation, and then what was discussed then at this meeting? You've mentioned that editorial policy was one of the matters that we discussed, and
yes.
Was that presentation dealt with at the second meeting?
I think there were certain things that he brought out there, So, for instance, the editorial policy is one. And if I remember correctly, there were, I've quoted extensively from my book in this as well, and I want to refer
Yes, you
to that.
can deal with it. You can deal with it.
Yes.
Is that fine with you, Ms. Noor?
Yes, thank you, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman. Maybe for record purposes, your extract is from pages 117 to 122.
That's correct,
of
yes.
your book. Yes, thank you.
Maybe we haven't. He hasn't said what his book is on record. Maybe
On record,
you
yes.
should ask him to.
Oh, thank you.
To say what
Yes, just
to
give the
identify his
title.
book.
I'm sure you know it off by heart. Okay, could you just...
What's the title?
The
of
title
the
of
The
book?
title of the book is Indentured Behind the Scenes at Gupta TV.
Yes,
Yes.
thank you. Thank you.
And you are the author.
Yes, and it's published by Jacana Media.
And
Yes.
you confirm the contents of the book as
Yes.
being true and correct according
Yes.
to your recollection.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I've given details here about how we were picked up by Ashu Chawla and taken there, and also about how the seating arrangement there was identical.
Yeah, tell us about that.
The same people who attended the first meeting attended the second meeting. The seating was identical. There was a chair that was reserved for the president. The head of the Gupta delegation was Muxim Williams. Because he was the oldest member of the team, he was asked to sit on the chair next to the president, followed by Nazim Hoa. To the right of the president, the Gupta brothers sat on a couch, and across the table from the couch, Arun Agarwal and I sat facing the Gupta brothers and the president. And
just before you move forward, you say that in paragraph 24, this was like a shareholders review meeting.
Yes, it was.
Yes.
Because,
Why do you say that?
It was a review meeting because in the first meeting we showed him the logo that had been designed by the designer in India. And the second meeting we took to him the animated logo, which had the music and the sting and all of that, So that is something that plays out on the top of the hour before each bulletin starts. So we took that to him for his approval. Although the contract with the person who made that design was that he'd just have one shot at it, and if it's approved. So if the president had said that he didn't like it, there was no way that they could go back and get it done again. But they got it to him for his approval.
Yes. Is there anything you want to highlight between the interaction you had with Mr. Ashu Chawla when we were proceeding? Sorry, I forgot that part. When we were proceeding to the president's official residence, is there anything you want to highlight about the interactions you had with him in the car?
He was somebody who was always edgy. He was somebody who was always preoccupied. That there were 10 things going on in his mind, and his handshakes were not. They were limp handshakes that he'd give out to people, almost distracted at all times.
I'm sorry, who was that? I missed that.
Mr. Ashu Chawla.
Oh, okay.
So, and he told us about how he had lived in South Africa for about 17 years, right from the time when, at that time for 17 years, right from the time when Atul Gupta had come to South Africa to set up Sahara Computers. He had been part of the team. I've also noted that, he rarely smiled, but when he spoke about his association with Atul Gupta, that was a time when we actually saw him smile at that point. And he also said that he saw himself as a regular South African because he lived here for so long. But his interest in music was very funny, because this was the kind of raunchy music that is in Bollywood films, and he would play that out loud in his car stereo. So from what we saw of him, he was somebody who was extremely shy. He was a backroom operator, if you will, for the Gupta family, and not somebody who was open to answering too many questions or engaging in small talk. Just if he's driving, he just keep driving and answer in monosyllables. So he was that kind of a person, and we could almost see that he was very nervous about this meeting, because he was the person who was charged with coordinating this meeting. So from making sure that the vehicle numbers are given to the president's office beforehand, to making sure that the people were picked up, and that was coordinated, to ensure that the president was there when the Gupta family brothers arrived. All of that was part of his responsibility, and that seemed to kind of keep him in a state which was always preoccupied, and so when he answered questions, it was almost like his mind was not there.
Yes, and then in paragraph 25.6, you deal with the seating arrangement, which you already testified to.
Yes.
But there is something that you say Rajesh said to you.
Yes,
Yes.
The seating arrangement was identical to
Yes.
that for the last meeting. Rajesh, today I will ask President to give us a broad overview of editorial policy and also some suggestions on who we should hire as presenters. We will hear what he has to say, but we do not have to but we will only do what we think suits our vision, Ajay Gupta told us.
Yes.
So also about the presenters, there was a problem, because there were many journalists who would not consider joining AN7 as well, because of the waterproof incident and the kind of reputation that the Guptas had. So that was an issue that they wanted to take to the president and seek suggestions from him on who they should hire. And the president did assure us in that meeting that he would make a few recommendations, including Jimmy Miney, who he said was a perfect fit for this kind of a position. And he said that you should call him to the studio, do an audition, and if it works out, he should definitely be hired. He also suggested a few other names. I do not remember those names, but some of them I remember were people who were sons and daughters of his colleagues at the ANC, who he said had good potentials, who were already working as journalists at radio stations, and he said you should give them a call, tell them that I told you to get in touch with them and get these things on the way. So that was also his, problem solving in that sense. The problem was that the journalists were not joining, and they took the problem to the president in that meeting, and he suggested that he would recommend a few names, and we could approach a few other journalists who he knew very well and say that the president asked us to speak with you, and would you come and join?
Yes. And then in paragraph 25.7, you deal with what the graphic designers had given you.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, so we played out that graphic design, and so and he seemed to be impressed with the graphic design as well. So we loaded a copy on the laptop and we showed it to him.
What was that?
I'm sorry.
You missed it?
Ms. Norman, did you ask him to deal with 25.7?
Yes, I'm asking you to deal with it.
Oh, okay,
Thank you.
yes.
Yes. Do you want to read? Maybe.
Yeah. As it was just a formality and we were not bound by what he was saying, I was happy to play the game they were playing with the president. I nodded. Yeah, so I did not know what to make of it at that time, because these were contradictory things that he was telling me. He said, one, we'll go to the president, seek an appointment and ask him what the editorial policy should be, other guidelines that he wanted for the television station. On the other hand, he's telling us that, but we don't have to listen to all of that. Just give him a sense that we're listening to him, but we don't have to really listen to him. If he, in our judgment, think that what the president said is wrong, we don't have to tell him it's wrong on his face, but, we will go back and do what we want.
Is that what you call in paragraph 25.7 of your statement, supplementary statement, is that what you call the game they were playing with the president?
Yeah. So it was a game that I thought they were playing with the president, where we were going and seeking an appointment with him, asking him for his views, and then saying that, well, we won't even do it. So why bother in the first place? Of course, by now I had known that the president's son was a shareholder here, and what was happening was a review. So while they valued him as a partner in this, they wanted to show that they valued him as a partner, but none of the advice that was given didn't really matter. So they said, we'll take the advice. If we like it, if it's implementable, we'll do it. Otherwise, just throw it into the dustbin and we'll do what we want to do. And the president, in the next meeting when we came back, whatever was possible, which we were doing anyways, they would show to the president, see, like you said, we are doing this. Like you said, we are doing that.
Yes.
Thank you. So then you said, then you loaded this, is this the logo montage that
Yes.
you were working on? Okay.
Yes. So the president, okay, so at that time we loaded on the logo, and also before that meeting, Ashu Chawla said that there were a lot of people from the president's family who were visiting him. So and that he would be joining us very shortly while we were waiting in the very same room, which is to the right of the entrance. It was a room which had the seating arrangement, and on the corner of which there was an electric socket on which Ashu would charge his phone at all times. And so the president arrived shortly, and this was a time when he had a lot of family members on a Sunday waiting for him in his room, and he took time out of a family engagement on a Sunday to come and spend time here. And as far as I remember...
I'm sorry, was there much waiting for the meeting to start this time?
I don't remember there was much meeting. The first meeting there was, and Ajay was getting impatient, but I don't remember for the second meeting there was much of this thing. But I do remember that there were family members who were with him at that time, and he took time that he was spending with his family, which he had allocated for his family, out. In the first meeting, it was time that he was spending with his cabinet colleagues, which he took out and came here. Here, he made his family wait and come out for this meeting.
Yes. And then 25.9, you talk about when the president then arrived.
Yeah, the president arrived shortly thereafter, and he was shown the channel ID. He was asked to see. So the president saw it once. Now, what these channel IDs are, they're just a few seconds long, so between 15 and 30 seconds. So if you saw it once, you may have missed some of the elements. So the president saw it 3, maybe 4 times, and he would pause it and see it again to see what the transitions in the graphics were. Also, the music that we had added to the graphical elements, whether they were in sync, he would stop and start and ask us to play it again. And then he gave his approval. And he had a copy of the presentation which we had given him the last time, and he said he had studied it, and he said he had a few suggestions that he wanted to give us based on that.
Yes. And then in 25.10, who said you mustn't convert this into a channel for the ANC?
This is President Zuma's advice on editorial policy. While he said that it should be a channel that I think the general understanding was that the mainstream media in South Africa was not giving an opportunity to come out with the ANC's views, or President Zuma's views, that they were inimical in some senses to him. So they needed a station that would come out and propagate his side or the ANC side of news events. Now, having said that, the president did not want this to be an out-and-out propaganda station. He wanted it to have a semblance of credibility. So he said that it should not block out rivals within the ANC. It should not block out political parties which were rivals to the ANC as well. So they should be, so he said that the push in our favor should be subtle. The push in the favor of the coterie around him in the ANC should be subtle. So, if you are talking about his rivals, it's not like you black them out entirely or block their content entirely, but it should be that you show them in a negative light, so that in the subtleties the message is conveyed, and you don't say it with the words directly, so it doesn't look like it's a North Korean style propaganda station as well. So this is something that he said directly. And at this time also he made a reference to ENCA and said that, the ENCA only presents the government and him negatively. That's the impression that he had at that time when he was speaking to me.
Yes. And then just read the last sentence as well of that, what you've just read negatively after that.
We need a channel that presents the positives that the government is doing, Zuma said, looking at me. Now, I must add here also that, this is something which was on the website of the New Age in terms of what their editorial policy was. They said that they would look at constructive criticism, so which is not what a news station is supposed to do. The news station is supposed to show, is to question power, to show a mirror to authority. That's what a station is supposed to do, not just show the positive sides of things. But like I said, by this time I had already known that this is not a station that I want to associate, although I was getting a fantastic salary, and every time I would mention this to any of the senior guys, they tell me that, oh, you're getting a fat salary, just sit on that fancy chair and enjoy your life. Why would you do that? But from the stations that I'd worked in before, the kind of journalism that I believed in, this kind of thing is something which made me decide pretty early on that I would not want to be in the station for much longer than after launch. And why did I want to stay till after launch? Because I had already, on my own credibility and reputation, I'd asked other senior journalists from India to come and join the station, who had come in not only themselves but with their families, had got their children admitted in school. And for me to now jump off before the launch would have been not the right thing to do at that time. But I had decided then that this is not a station that I had any long-term plans for, and that I would quit. So all of this was just reinforcing that belief for me.
Yes. Just as a layperson, is it possible for a journalist to do what you were asked to do in that paragraph? That, look, you portray certain things in a particular way and you portray other things in a particular way to perhaps push a particular narrative. Is it possible for journalists to actually do that?
Well, they shouldn't be doing that, but I'm sure if somebody thinks that their job at a station depends on doing this and they had no other option, there are journalists who would be forced to do this. I mean, there would be some who would refuse to do it and just move out. But if it is between unemployment and economic hardships at the other end, or compromising on your values, there would be certain journalists who would be willing to do this as well. And
then during your time at AN7, I'm jumping a bit, would you say that whatever it is, as the editor at the time, whatever it is that was sold to the public or sent out publicly from that TV station was reliable news, and you did not do things the way in which 25.10 suggested?
I would say here that my role as an editor was for about a few weeks after the launch, and most of my time was taken up in setting up the station. So it was really a struggle with, on the one hand, setting the station, training the staff, getting the processes in place, and on the other hand, dealing with Atul Gupta, who was like a dragon breathing a bit on my shoulder about how things had to be done fast and putting all of that. There was a tremendous amount of pressure that he was putting on the technical team. In my experience, a station should be launched only after about a month of dry runs, where there are a lot of bugs. Like for instance, the graphic systems would be made in Europe somewhere. The main servers would have come from America. The lighting systems may have come from another part of the world. The cameras may have come from Japan. For these systems to speak, once the integration happens, there are a lot of bugs that are thrown up. The teleprompter comes from another company, and for it to all start working together, it takes about a month, where the technical team and the editorial team should work closely, eliminate those bugs, and only then the launch should happen. But in this case, what had happened is that Ajay Gupta and Atul Gupta had already decided a launch date without consulting the professionals. And for us, we knew that there was a train coming in the opposite direction at double the speed, and we were on the same track. We had our hands tied behind our back, and we had to go in for that launch, and we knew it was a disaster. But as professionals, we had to commit suicide. There was no other option for us, because the technical team was under constant pressure. The vendors who were supposed to deliver, for instance, the studio cameras came on the last day, the day that the launch was supposed to take place. They were still fitting the robotic cameras. Now, these robotic cameras require the vendor to come in and for training to be given. There are a lot of bugs that are there. In terms of the bugs, if I can explain, on the day of the launch, the teleprompter would black out suddenly. It'd go blank totally. And the anchors who were reading it were not professional broadcast anchors, but they were models who were being trained. And the PCR staff, since they did not want to hire any South Africans because they thought they'd be more expensive, they got people from India who spoke very little English. So the cues would go in Hindi, and the teleprompter failed, and the anchor, who's not a professional journalist, would be sitting there petrified, because the standard operating procedure is for the PCR to tell her that, look, there's a technical failure. Why don't you just announce a break right now and come back? We'll fix the bug and we'll come back here. But they would tell that to her in Hindi, and she would not know what was happening. And all of that. And there was a world out there looking at the launch, and they would tweet about all of that, take pictures and put it out. And that was, I think, the most depressing time of my life, because, in my entire career, I had never seen a train wreck like that. And, to be heading that with very little say in the way things were, it was the saddest phase of my life, and for no fault of mine, because this is something that Atul Gupta and Ajay Gupta had done for the pure greed. They knew that the station had to start on time, because then the revenues would start coming on time, and then all the shareholders would start getting the cuts of the dividend earlier than possible. They were not really bothered about the content.
So those were the logistical nightmares that you experienced. I'm interested more in content.
Yes.
If I go back and I watch the news that AN7 showed and communicated to the public during the period just immediately after its launch until you left, can I comfortably say, as a South African citizen, what I watched was reliable news?
I wouldn't say that, because I remember that there were editorial meetings that we held with, because the people that we'd hired for the kind of budgets that we had were very young journalists, very hardworking journalists. I mean, I've set up stations, and I know that the bunch that we had here were very, very hardworking. They wouldn't complain about the long working hours or the fact that there was problems with the systems. And these were young journalists who were idealists, So most of the times I found that the editorial meeting was hijacked by Nazim Hua, who would say things like, if there is a DA press conference, don't even cover that. Or there's a new political party that was being formed, well, why should we give them any access? My thoughts in this would have been that anybody who is a political entity, it's not my business as a journalist to decide whether I'm going to allow them to have a voice or not. My business was to cover that and let the people decide whether they want to hear it or not, which was not the case, because like I said, the word I'm using is hijacked. It was hijacked by people like Nazim Hua and Muxim Williams, who would thrust the same philosophy they had running the New Age onto this, And I had anyways decided to take a backseat And this was a few days before I had resigned and decided to move out.
Yes. So this bring this content to the Editorial team. You are part of that team. I just want to understand, would you allow them to hijack it and push it the way they wanted it to go? Or would you, as the responsible editor that you are, say, you cannot do this, this is not done, and therefore I will not support the publication of this particular news? Or how did it work?
Well, I would register my complaint, I'd tell him that this is the thing, but of course, Mr. Nazim Hoa was the CEO, and for all practical purposes, he said that he was a journalist before he came in there. And for me, while I had experience working in India, in Sri Lanka, and the Middle East, even some bits in Pakistan, this was my very first time in South Africa. So I had to give in to the fact that he was a person who knew the political situation in South Africa far better than me. And the options I had was to either move out of it, to either lead, which I couldn't because clearly I had just come to South Africa a few weeks before, a few months before, or to get out of the way. And I chose to get out of the way because I did not agree with what was happening. If I were to apply the rules of journalism that I had learned in journalism school and which I had followed all my life, I would have said all political parties, if they have a press conference, please cover it. If there's any view that anybody has out there, please cover it, put it on the air and let the people decide. We should not get into censorship at any point, especially in editorial policy, especially when you have an editorial team which is as young as what we had at that time. There should not have been any scope for influencing the young minds on how to do their journalism, because most of the young people who had joined us as reporters at that time had come from universities where they knew what good journalism was about, how they were supposed to cover, but that was being corrupted by the kind of views that Mr. Nazim, I thought, was giving in the editorial meetings.
Yes, you see, I'm not a journalist. I just want to understand whose responsibility it is to make sure that news that goes out is reliable news. Whose responsibility is it?
It is the editor's responsibility, and it is the collective responsibility of the editorial team, but I think the buck stops with the editor. Yes. And I was frustrated. I was, and I was told more than one occasion that, look, you have a fancy salary, you have a fancy chair to sit on. Why don't you just sit there? You've already set up the station and, look the other way. Yeah. And I was quoted, I was also told that, look at Muxim Williams. Do you see him? There are, Atul Gupta has got a cell phone on which the movement of all the journalists in the new age can be monitored at 24-hour basis. He knows how many minutes a journalist at the new age is taking a cigarette break or has gone out to have coffee, or if he's gone out on an assignment, how long has he taken to come back? So that is the kind of monitoring that Atul Gupta used to do of the team. And he had people within the newsroom, including Mr. Aslam, whose job it was to report back to him on each and every development that was happening in the newsroom. Yes. What were the editors doing? Even to the extent that how long is a toilet break that people are taking was something that he knew. He had CCTV cameras all around. If Mr. Muxim Williams could live with that in the new age, why don't you live with whatever's happening? Let them micromanage for you.
Yeah. Would you then say that having given that, you've given some justification for it as to why you would have perhaps turned a blind eye to what you were supposed to do, but would you agree with me then that by doing so, you might have compromised what came out of that news station because of the various reasons that you've given, that you've got someone interfering with the editorial matters, and also there's threat that, look, if you don't do what you're being told to do, you might have to leave. Was there a point where you felt, that, look, here I allowed myself to be put in a position where any editor shouldn't be put in?
Well, one of the reasons why I decided to come to South Africa was the kind of romance that I associated with South Africa. Growing up in India, I used to read the papers every day about the struggles that were happening there. The leaders like Nelson Mandela, the kind of the various actors there. I was very inspired by that. It was part of the textbooks when we were studying there. The government of India was very much, part of a ban that was there on the apartheid regime here. I still remember the first passport that I got had printed on it that, that on this passport he cannot travel to the Republic of South Africa, which is part of the government of India's policy on the apartheid regime. So for me, coming to South Africa and working with a young team of South Africans was a dream of sorts, So I thought it was worthwhile for me to leave my young daughters and family to come for this project and convince my family about it. But I have regret right now that I was part of a team that I set up a television station for what I see was the mafia for purposes of propaganda, which is not something that I wanted to do. And I think this is the biggest regret that I have in my life. And one of the reasons why I wrote the book, I had no, if I wanted, I could have just started on with my life and gone on. But I took a few months off to write the book immediately after I came back, because I knew that it was not enough for me to just have run away from there, but I had to tell the story to the others. Even now, after the book was written, I went through a kidney transplant just a few months ago, and after writing the book, if I did not come and testify here, the regret that I have would have stayed with me. So this is, in some senses, a kind of closure for me, that I can come and testify here and tell you the circumstances in which I served, the circumstances in which I quit, the circumstances in which they became very hostile and almost had to run. I feared for my life and the future of my children during the last days here. So yes, I do regret the fact that I set up a station for the mafia, which was to be used for propaganda. And but to be honest, I had thought, because I was in a dilemma at that time. Because if I had quit a few days after I had joined, I would put the careers of the colleagues that I had got with me in jeopardy. They had already got their kids out of school, and it's very difficult to get admission in schools in India once you've taken them out, and then they had relocated here, they put their kids in schools. And for me to quit and leave without, this channel settling in any way would have been unfair. But I had taken a decision very early that I would quit the station. This is not the place I want to work. Yeah. But I'll do it after I launch it. I was the captain of the ship. I wouldn't desert it in the middle. Yeah. I would take it to a particular conclusion, which is the launch, post which I do not agree with any of this, and I'd quit and I would go.
So can we then, just to summarize that, can you accept that whatever came out during the time just after the launch until you left was compromised news, which happened under your watch?
I would agree with that.
Yes.
I would say yes.
Yes, thank you.
You have told us about the first meeting, and you have told us about the second meeting.
Yes.
You have told us about the people who attended these two meetings. Mm-hmm. As far as I recall, you didn't say that Mr. Duduzane Zuma was present at any of these first two meetings.
No, he wasn't. As a matter of fact, he was not involved in any of the decision making. It was his father who was, who would act like a shareholder in this. He did make a few appearances.
Had you met him by the time of the second meeting? Had you met Mr. Duduzane Zuma?
No, I haven't.
And this was what? The second meeting happened when you were in your second month in South Africa? Or
yes, in July.
In July. That you arrived in
June.
In June.
Yes.
Early June?
Yes, it was the 3rd of June. So today is the 6th year of my life.
Oh, first week of June.
Yes.
And so it was now July, so it was your second month.
Yes.
You had not met him yet?
No.
Had you met all the other directors of the company in Infinity Media as you understood them at that stage,
yes,
other than him?
Yes, I had met Lakshmi Goyal, I had met the Gupta brothers, I had met Muksim, and I had met Nazim Hoa, but I did not meet Duduzane till the day of the third meeting.
Yes. So was he the only director of your employer that you had not met by the time of the second meeting?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm told that it's 1 o'clock. May we then adjourn for lunch until...
Yes, okay. We'll adjourn for lunch now, and we will resume at 2 o'clock.
Thank you.
We adjourn.
Thank you.